Hey, I'm Todd from Hovr. Today we're going to show you how to take any piece of wood, turn it into a beautiful and strong floating shelf using the Hovr Bracket System. Okay, for this shelf, we're going to make it 12 by 24 inches. So we're going to place our square on the end and we'll mark out our length, and our depth is already at 12. And at 8 inches from the wall, this shelf will support 300 pounds. Now that we have our shelf cut out to the size that we want, we're going to prepare the back of the shelf to receive the Hovr bracket. And since our shelf is at least 2 inches thick, we have room for material left on either side of the channel, which will help for the integrity of the shelf. After this, we're going to look at 3 options for attaching the bracket. But for now, let's turn to the table saw. And on the table saw, you can either use a dado blade, which is basically a thick blade that cuts out more wood, or you can use a single blade with multiple passes to achieve the same goal. But what you definitely want is to make sure that the blade of your table saw is set up no higher than the female side of your bracket, which is the side with the 90-degree edge on it. So I'm going to lay my bracket on my table saw, and I'm going to look at the highest point of my blade and make sure that it's not sticking up any higher than the edge of the bracket itself. The next thing I'm going to do is prepare my fence for the proper width. In this case, I want 1/4 inch of material left on the edge of my shelf. So I'm setting my fence up to be 1/4 inch away from the blade. Now I know that I'm ready to begin dadoing out the channel for the bracket. In this case, I want my bracket to recess into the back of the shelf so that I have 1 inch of material left on the end. So my bracket's going to end here and insert into the back of the shelf. Therefore, my table saw blade, I want to look at the point of furthest contact of where the blade touches the wood. That's where the blade recesses into the table. That's going to be the furthest cutting point. And I want to place a mark on the top of my table saw right there, and also at the back of the blade as well. That way I know that when I'm dadoing, if this mark matches up with that mark, then I'm not going to cut too far into the end of my channel, but I'm going to end exactly where I want to with my dado cut. And now we're ready to start up our saw and make our cut. So you want to grab the shelf on the top for safety, keeping your hands away from the blade, and you want to lower the shelf down onto the blade so that this mark matches that mark. Lowering the shelf slowly, and then once you make contact with the top of the table, you want to move forward until this mark here matches up with the mark on your table. Let's try a pass. Now you can see your channel. Your first pass is cut, lining up with the marks on the side of the shelf. Now you need to move your fence over for your second pass. And as you can see, the bracket fits inside. Now we'll go to our third step, using the router to clean out the channel. So this is the top view of your shelf, and once you finish your dado cut, you'll notice you've got a rise at the end of your cut that follows the profile of the blade. So you've got a few options here. You can either leave the shelf as is, as long as it's the proper depth, which we'll talk about in a second. And you can cut your bracket to end right here before the rise. It's It's got to be on the flat part of the dado cut. And that's about 3 inches from the end of your cut on an average table saw blade. Same as the other end, you'd cut your bracket to here. The other option is to clean out the end of your cut with either a chisel or a router, and you want to take out this rounded shoulder to match the flat profile of your dado cut. So if you don't own a router, no problem. You can do a little bit of chisel work to make that happen. Or if you own a handheld router, you can clean out the end of your channel with this. Some of these come with a nice guide to keep you from blowing out the edge of your cut, which you do not want to do. You clean out your end with that, and the bit that you want is a double flute straight bit, and it cuts a channel like that, nice and square on both sides. The third option is a table mounted router. And if you're used to using these, you'll know how to set up your 2 fences. To set up my 2 fences, I've simply placed my shelf on top of the bit until it reaches the end of the bit. That's my 1 fence. Same thing with the other side. Move it over until the bit touches the shelf, and that's the position of your other fence. Now you're ready to go. And so when you're done, in this case, I've used a table mounted router to clean out this end, allowing your bracket to extend further into the edge of your shelf. Now the most important thing, regardless of what method you use, is the depth of your bracket in the back of your shelf. Now the female side is just a fingernail shorter than the straight side. One side has a 90-degree curve on it, the other is straight. On the 90-degree side, you want that to sit just a fingernail below the edge of your material like we have here. And this side, the straight side, needs to sit just a fingernail above the edge of your material. Just slightly above. And now you know you've got the exact depth of channel to receive your Hovr bracket. So I'm using pan head screws, which help. If you're using a hammer drill, you don't want to apply excessive torque or you'll strip the threads in the wood. Or if it's strong enough, you'll drive the head through the aluminum. Just tight enough is what you want. You'll notice I cut my channel slightly wider than the bracket, which doesn't matter. You want the 90-degree edge to be on the top of your shelf and the straight edge to be on the bottom. And since I'm using a live edge shelf, I chose the angled side facing up for the top of my shelf. You want to check that before installing your bracket. So wood screws or pen head screws work just fine. You just don't want to use excessive torque on your screw because you could damage the wood itself or the aluminum. So if you're using a hammer drill, go easy. You just want a nice snug fit of the bracket against the wood. So now we're going to drill the 2 holes in the bottom of the shelf to receive the threaded set screw, which is important for marrying the male part of the bracket with the female bracket and tightening those 2 components once it's on the wall. So I'm going to measure approximately 2 inches from the end of the bracket. And then I'm going to measure 1/2 inch in from the edge for my drill point to make an X. So once again, 2 inches in, and then 1/2 inch of depth for your drill mark. Same thing here, 1/2 inch. First, I drill through both the wood and the aluminum, and the size of the drill is on your screen for reference. Then I'm going to switch over to my tapered tappet bit. The size of this is also on your screen for reference. This creates the threads in the aluminum so that the threads on the set screw can grab in the aluminum, tightening the two parts of your bracket together. Once you've completed that step, then the set screw, you'll notice it has an Allen key hole in one end and just a smooth end on the other. You want to put the smooth end in first, and you'll notice that it'll grab in the threads. Now we're ready to go to the next step of attaching your shelf to the wall. So far we've cut the channel on the back of our shelf, and we've inserted the female bracket in the back of the shelf and screwed it in. Then we've drilled our 2 holes in the bottom of the shelf and threaded the aluminum with a tappet screw. So now we're ready to attach the shelf to the wall, and most importantly of all, we've used proper safety measures because fingers don't always grow back. Just kidding, I still have all mine. Hey, I'm Todd and we're back at the Hovr warehouse, and we're going to look at how to install the male bracket to the wall. So the first thing you want to do is find the studs on your wall. Here the screws are my first clue, but if you don't see any signs of studs, you can use a stud finder. Mark where those studs are on your wall, mark the location. Then after you mark the location of your studs, you want to put your bracket on the wall. In this case, mine are traditional 16 inches apart, like many studs are. Then I'm going to mark my bracket right in the middle of that stud. Then I'm going to take my bracket over to my bench, and I'm going to drill a hole, top and bottom, right on the ridge line that you see here on the bracket. Both sides have a ridge line. So let's drill our holes. And if you don't have studs in your wall, you can go to our knowledge base and see how to attach your bracket if you only have 1 stud, or if you only have drywall, or if you have steel studs. But in this case, we'll work with the wood stud application. You want to keep a firm hold on your bracket so it doesn't twist, catch on your drill bit. Fairly easy to drill through this aluminum. Now when you place your bracket on the wall, you want to put a screw through each hole deeply into the stud. 2.5 inches is the suggested length. But don't over drill your screw or you could damage the aluminum or strip the threads in the stud. If you're using an impact driver especially, be careful you don't over torque the screw and damage your product. And once you have it attached to the wall, now you're ready to attach your shelf as the next stage. So So one other note about the bracket, these two die lines that you see are a purposeful part of the design, and that's where you want to center your drill bit when you're drilling the holes. And this is a 3/16 drill bit you want to use for drilling through metal. And very important, the screw needs to be a number 8 pan head screw that's 2.5 inches long, that's flat on the bottom of the screw. If you use a tapered screw and over torque, this can actually go right through the aluminum. So this is not the kind of screw you want to use. So sometimes you'll notice your drywall is not exactly even and it has a bit of a wow to it, it goes in and out. The most important thing is when you're installing your bracket, you don't want to torque your bracket so that it sucks into the wow in your drywall, because then your female bracket will have trouble aligning because your bracket will no longer be straight. So if you have a wow in your drywall, simply leave the gap, and you can fill that in with silicone later, but just don't bend the bracket to accommodate to the bend in your drywall is the most important thing to remember. Also, if you over torque the top or the bottom, it'll twist the bracket on the wall this way, also making it difficult to attach the female bracket. You want to keep that nice and straight up and down like this, not tilting it either way. So when you attach your male bracket to the wall, you'll notice that the top of the bracket has a slant, and the purpose of that is to receive the female bracket when you attach the shelf. So placing that on top with a level, you can place your bracket on the wall at the appropriate height. And using a pencil, you can put a mark line on your wall to help you. Once you have your mark, you're ready to go. Okay, making sure my lines are on the stud and the shelf is also level with the angled part at the top. Screw the bracket to the wall, not over torquing, just making sure it's firm and secure. And now you're ready to attach your shelf. So when you're ready to attach your shelf, you just want to hook the upper part of your female bracket onto the upper part of your male bracket. And you just angle the shelf at about 15 degrees and then angle it down straight to attach. You may need to give it a slight tap. And now the shelf is seated because it's at 90 degrees to your wall. Now you're ready to install the set screws on the bottom of the shelf. Or if you're gluing your shelf to the wall, you can apply glue. That's the application that you're choosing. Now it's time to install the set screws. You can do this by hand, inserting them into the pre-drilled holes, and turn them until they're finger tight. And then finalize them with your Allen key until they're nice and snug. And that fully marries the female bracket to the male bracket, making your shelf secure and tight to the wall. So if you're like me, you probably got some unanswered questions, and if you do, just head on over to the website, to our knowledge base, and we've got the answers there for you. Good luck with your project.